Hello everybody, it's TannerFishies here, back again with a new Ninjago video here on the channel. In today's video, we're going to be counting down my updated list of the top 10 Ninjago episodes of all time. Now obviously, going through all of Ninjago, there are a lot of episodes to take into consideration here. There are indeed almost 200 episodes of the show, and obviously not all of them can be in my top 10. My top 10 was actually recently revealed when I did my video ranking every single episode of the series, and if you haven't seen that video, I recommend checking it out. If you have seen it, you would know what my top 10 is in terms of every Ninjago episode. Now obviously in this video I plan to go into a little bit more of an in-depth analysis of each episode. I have reviewed each episode individually that I'm going to be talking about here, so if you want to hear even more of my thoughts regarding any specific episode, feel free to check out my playlist of episode reviews in which I have reviewed every single episode. For another quick disclaimer, this video will simply just be my own opinion. Like I said, this is my own personal top 10 list, ranking my top 10 favorite Ninjago episodes. As such, this is not the definitive list of the 10 best Ninjago episodes or anything like that. This is just my own personal top 10, and after the video is over, I would recommend ranking your top 10 in the comment section down below. I'm curious to see what you guys come up with. Without further ado, why don't we go ahead and jump into it here. Let's go ahead and rank my top 10 Ninjago episodes, starting with number 10, which is going to be season 13, episode 16, The Son of Lilly. This episode actually was the big conclusion to season 13, Master of the Mountain, which just so happens to be one of my favorite seasons. This episode kind of carries over events from the last episode, in which the big climactic battle between Cole and the Skull Sorcerer is going down. Cole is equipped with both Blades of Deliverance, and he is just obliterating the Skull Sorcerer. However, in this episode, the Skull Sorcerer does indeed get the upper hand and destroys the blades, leaving Cole kind of helpless. He manages to have a very emotional flashback of his mother, rest in peace, Cole's mom, and he unlocks the power of the Spinjitzu Burst, an elemental power which can only be achieved by Earth elemental users as of this moment in time, of course, and he manages to defeat the Skull Sorcerer, and all is right in the world. I really enjoy this episode for a lot of reasons. For one, the emotional development of Cole. His journey throughout season 13 was quite the impressive one, and it actually went a long way to actually crafting his character and building more of what Cole is all about. I really enjoyed how raw and emotional this episode was, especially considering it's one of the newer seasons. We don't really see a lot of this kind of stuff in newer Ninjago, and obviously this episode being the big conclusion of season 13, it definitely did not disappoint, and as such it takes the number 10 spot on my list. I absolutely love this episode. Next up on the list in the number 9 spot, we have Dread on Arrival, which is going to be season 8, episode 8. Now, Dread on Arrival was basically the big start of the conclusion to the Sons of Garmadon saga's finale. Obviously, with Harumi getting all 3 of the Oni masks, this episode is basically all about her trying to resurrect Garmadon, and it eventually does indeed work. The ninja, of course, have to intervene and stop Harumi, while also trying to save Lloyd and his mother, who are, of course, tied up and pretty much dropped into the water every so often. This episode has a lot of tension with it, and that's the biggest thing that I can appreciate about this episode. The tension is insane. I also loved seeing all of the ninja combat the Sons of Garmadon. This is basically the big final battle, if you will, or at least what the ninja were hoping to be the final battle for the Sons of Garmadon saga, like I said. The episode ends with a big teaser of Garmadon's eventual return, meaning that the ceremony was indeed successful. Like I said, along with the tension, I really enjoyed how this episode was just kind of creepy in nature. It gives off this really weird and scary vibe. It's almost sort of mystical in a way, and the episode is set at night too, even adding more to that creep factor. This episode was very good in my opinion, definitely one of my favorites of Sons of Garmadon, but still not my favorite season 8 episode. That one comes later. For now, Dread on Arrival takes the number 9 spot. Next up in the number 8 spot, we have season 3, episode 2, Art of the Silent Fist. I really like this episode. I don't know why. It's just one of those episodes that I always think back on with fond memories. Obviously, the episode kind of picks up following the big premiere of season 3. The ninja are being hunted down by the Overlord, and they take refuge at Sensei Garmadon's new monastery. Later on in the episode, they also manage to fight off the Ninjroids at a big power plant, and that battle itself is pretty impressive. This episode does indeed focus on Zane a lot, and I really like Zane's character in this episode specifically. I just love how good his character is, and his battle with General Cryptor towards the end is just very iconic to me. I love this episode. My favorite part about this episode, though, is the whole Sensei Garmadon aspect of it. This was the big return of Garmadon following his purification after the end of season 2, and he is just awesome. I love his technique of fighting. I love how wise and mystical he is. He's almost like Wu, but a little better, if that makes sense, and I just really love this episode for that reason. I always think back on this episode with fond memories, and it's honestly one of my most nostalgic Ninjago Ninjago episodes for some reason, and considering how it came out of Season 3, that's quite impressive to say the least. That a later season like Season 3 could actually give me some nostalgia blasts, it's honestly very surprising. Next up in the number 7 spot we have Green Destiny, which is Season 9, Episode 10. Green Destiny is a very iconic final battle, and this one is a very solid season finale. It features the ninja traveling back from the First Realm to take part in the Ninjago City battle against Garmadon and his forces. Now the big appeal for me about this episode is the battle between Wu, Lloyd, and Garmadon. Wu and Lloyd decide to team up against Garmadon, Wu donning his father's golden armor, and Lloyd pretty much armed with his father's wisdom. He basically uses Garmadon's lessons against him, and I really enjoy how that was actually played out. My only complaint about this episode is that Master Wu kind of leaves the battle a little early, but that does indeed leave room for Lloyd to unlock his powers once again in one of the most epic displays of power I've ever seen throughout Ninjago. The ninja are also messing around in the background a little bit trying to take down the Oni Titan, but the big appeal for me, like I said about this episode, is the battle between the family, between Wu, Lloyd, and Garmadon. That battle itself was just really impressive to me, and I honestly love how that battle was actually executed in this episode. Otherwise, the rest of the episode is good too, don't get me wrong. It's just that part in particular is one of my favorite things about Ninjago, and as such, Green Destiny takes the number 7 spot on this list. Next up in the number 6 spot, we have the Titanium Ninja, which is going to be Season 3, Episode 8. This was the big conclusion of Season 3, and it was also one of the big conclusions to Zane's character. Obviously, following the entirety of Rebooted, Zane learned a lot more about himself and what he stood for, and he used all of that effectively during the final moments of this episode, which is probably one of Ninjago's most famous moments, where Zane sacrifices himself to defeat the Overlord and ultimately leaves the ninja as he presumably dies and departs naturally. Now, with that being said, Zane's sacrifice is one of the most memorable scenes of this episode. In fact, a lot of people really enjoy this episode specifically because of Zane's sacrifice, as it is very emotional and very raw and very well done, especially in terms of flashbacks and music. It's all very, very good. However, the rest of the episode is pretty good too, featuring the ninja trying to invade Ninjago City after the Overlord has taken it over. It's a very impressive battle, and I really enjoy the actual fight scenes that are going on in this episode, ultimately climaxing with Zane's sacrifice like I just said. And of course, the big tease at the end of the episode doesn't really hurt either. It definitely makes for a very good episode and a very good season finale. As such, the Titanium Ninja takes the number 6 spot on this list. In the number 5 spot on this list, we have another season finale. This is going to be the last one that you see on this list in terms of finales, so don't worry there. This is going to be Rise of the Spinjitzu Master Season 2, Episode 13. This episode used to be my all-time favorite. However, growing up, I've come to realize that the only reason why this episode used to be my all-time favorite was because of nostalgia. This episode gives me insane nostalgia blasts, especially with the final battle, which is still one of my favorite moments throughout all of Ninjago, even though some people don't like it. I don't know, I thought it was kind of cool. I thought it was very memorable seeing Golden Lloyd battle the Overlord. What a very fond memory from my childhood, and it's still one of my fondest memories, even as an adult today. I really love this episode for a lot of reasons. It features the ninja traveling to the mainland Ninjago after their defeat at the last episode, and they basically dive headfirst into the Overlord conflict, leading to the big climactic battle between the Overlord and Lloyd. Like I said, this episode features a lot of very good things for me, and it's just one of those episodes that I honestly like to revisit quite a bit. I find this episode to be very enjoyable for me personally, and obviously the nostalgia absolutely helps my enjoyment of this episode, but still, as an episode itself, it's a very solid season finale, and it's probably my favorite season finale of all time. And as such, it takes the number 5 spot on this list. Next up at the number 4 spot, we have Versus, which is going to be Season 4, Episode 3. Season 4 is one of my favorite seasons of all time, you guys would know that, but unfortunately this is the only episode of Season 4 that I was able to put on this list, and that's because it's my favorite. I love Versus so much. It's only my 4th favorite episode overall, but it's definitely the highlight of the Tournament of Elements saga for me, especially the battle between Jay and Cole, which is easily one of Ninjago's most iconic fights. The battle between Jay and Cole was kind of already brewing starting from Season 3, and this was basically the big finale to that battle. The Jay and Cole feud over Nia is something that a lot of Ninjago fans don't really enjoy, but to me personally, I like it. I like seeing the actual battle play out between Jay and Cole. I love how they start off as kind of bitter enemies, but then choose to be friends again towards the end, and I really enjoyed Cole making the ultimate sacrifice to move Jay along in the tournament, hence losing his own spot. I really enjoyed this episode for that reason, but also the rest of the episode is pretty good too, featuring some other very cool battles, especially Kai versus Ash, Smash. Overall, I really enjoyed Versus for a lot of reasons. It's easily my favorite episode of Season 4, and it features some very iconic Ninjago fights that are still some of the best that we've seen from the series to this day. In the number 3 spot, we have Dead Man's Squall, Season 8, Episode 5. This episode has a lot going on. We start off the episode with a very solid fight between Zane and Mr. E, which results in a heavily injured Zane, and that fight itself is very brutal and very personal. That battle is easily one of the most, graphic and violent fights that we've seen throughout all of Ninjago, featuring Zane getting launched off of a cliff and crashing, basically almost dying there, and I really enjoyed that battle. It ultimately leads to later on in the episode where the Destiny's Bounty is having some malfunctions as the Samurai X attacks. Now obviously Samurai X is revealed to be Pixel in this episode, and the conflict between the controlled Samurai X and the ninja is also something worthwhile. Set almost entirely on the stormy Destiny's Bounty, this episode is another one of those Sons of Garmadon episodes that just ups the creep factor, especially when you take into consideration this episode introduced the little spider robot thing that was living inside Zane. That in and of itself is quite scary. I also love the big reveal of Pixel being Samurai X. That was also quite nerve-wracking. Overall, this episode does a very good job at establishing some very good tension, some very good creepiness, and some very good fights at multiple points throughout this episode. This one is probably my favorite episode from Sons of Garmadon, I'd say. It's just so good in a lot of different ways. It just starts off really strong, and it never loses that momentum for me. And as such, this episode takes the number 3 spot on my list. Next up in the runner-up spot, we have Season 6, Episode 8, The Last Resort. If you guys know me, you would know that I am a very big supporter of Jay and Nia. They're probably my favorite ship throughout all of Ninjago, and this episode is basically all of them. Following the rest of Skybound, where all of the ninja have basically been stolen away, except for Jay and Nia, they need to work together despite their differences, and they choose to hide out from Nauticon at the lighthouse where Zane's father was once held prisoner. This episode does a very good job at developing and showcasing where these two characters are. We understand Nia's perspective finally in this episode, as she basically lets everything out to Jay, and Jay in response lets everything out back, ultimately bringing them closer together, especially towards the finale of this episode, which features the Sky Pirates raid on the lighthouse. Now this raid does indeed have some of my favorite battles from Skybound, my favorite of which being the fight between Jay and Doubloon. I don't know why, I just really love that battle, it's one of my favorites, and also we get a rematch of Nia versus Dogshank. The entirety of this episode is very tense, like I said, especially when the Sky Pirates start invading. This ultimately leads to the finale of this episode, where Jay and Nia pretty much confess their love for one another. Nia confesses her deepest secrets to Jay, and Jay doesn't really have time to respond as Nia sacrifices her own position as a ninja to set Jay free. This would later lead to Jay bouncing back and basically leading a resistance against Nauticon and saving everybody, and this episode was essentially the big catalyst for those future events. This episode is very good in my opinion, both in terms of writing and especially dialogue. I love the interactions between Nia and Jay, and I just love how they're able to understand each other a little bit more, especially in the case of Nia. Like I said, this episode does her a lot of justice, and it's probably the best episode for Jay and Nia shippers out there like myself. So obviously I had to put this on the list somewhere, and it quickly became my number 2 favorite episode of all time. Loved this episode ever since I first saw it, and that affection has not stopped to this day. And now we get to the number 1. My favorite episode of all time of Ninjago is Island of Darkness, Season 2, Episode 10. Now, going back to what I said about the final battle, Season 2 has a lot of nostalgia, at least for me. This was basically my peek into getting into Ninjago. Ninjago was wrapping up, it was building up to that final battle, and I was all there for it. Especially in this episode, where the ninja frantically try to make it to the Temple of Light. That's essentially the entire episode, try to locate and get to the Temple of Light, using various new vehicles such as the Earth Driller and the Fire Mech to make that happen. I don't think a lot of Ninjago fans now would even understand this, but back in the day when this episode came out, a lot of these sets for the final battle hadn't even been released yet, so showcasing vehicles like the Fire Mech and the Earth Driller, that was a pretty big deal because we didn't even know if they were going to be getting sets yet, let alone not even having the sets for them at that time. This was a very big deal, so I have a lot of nostalgia for those big reveals, and also the Temple of Light is just gorgeous. I love the interior of the Temple of Light. It's one of my favorite locations throughout all of Ninjago, and the bit in which they all get their kimono suits and their elemental blades, that moment is still very precious to me, and it's one of my favorite Ninjago moments of all time. This would ultimately lead to a big battle between the ninja and the stone warriors, with Lloyd tapping into his golden power for the first time towards the conclusion of this episode. This is a very solid episode for me for a lot of reasons, like I just said. It's basically non-stop action front to back, and after the episode reaches the halfway point, it really starts to get going, and it provided me some of my favorite Ninjago childhood memories, so I'm gonna have to give this episode a pretty high score. As such, I decided to make Island of Darkness my #1 favorite episode of all time for all of the reasons that I just listed. So thank you so much for checking out this video, everybody. That'll pretty much wrap it up for this one right here. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about my top 10 favorite episodes. Obviously, a lot of them are based on nostalgia, but I do have soft spots for some newer episodes too. I feel like season 13 especially had some good episodes. Seabound has some good episodes too, but none of them really stood out to me as being super special, especially compared to everything that I actually put on this list. So my list, as you saw it, is my final list for right now, but of course it's always subject to change. So like I said, that'll pretty much wrap it up for my thoughts here today on this video. Leave a comment down below talking about what your favorite episodes are, or even make a top 10 list like I did. And what do you think of my choices? Do I have good taste or not so much? Leave all your thoughts down below in the comments, you guys. And once again, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and check out the links down below in the description for other forms of social media. As always, big shout out goes out to my Patreon supporters, including once again the marvelous Jan. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video once again. My name is TannerFishies, and with that I bid you farewell.